Sometimes I feel so sad, watching this generation die before my eyes. They're so desensitized from what is right, they cannot discern what is wrong. They've been misled since they were born.
So we're back with Patrik Os talking about the topic of race and genetics. And there's a scripture passage in the second commandment in Exodus chapter 20. Can you read the second commandment in Exodus chapter 20 for us?
Exodus 20, verse 4. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments.
So we see in Scripture this consistent phrase. It's actually repeated numerous times in the Bible. This phrase, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. So there's an article that we're looking at together right now. It's called New Brain Research Reveals Your Habits Are Passed On to Your Children and Grandchildren. So there are a few things I wanted to highlight in this. I guess maybe we'll alternate paragraphs if that's okay.
Sure.
Have you ever wondered why some patterns in your family history seem to be recurring in your own life? Strongholds such as anxiety, poverty, illness, and addictions, to name a few. The Bible refers to these as generational curses, which the church has long believed was purely spiritual. But according to New Brain Research, this biblical principle is far more scientific than we realize.
The concept of generational curses is presented in Exodus 25. In the King James Version, it says that God will visit the sins of the fathers down to the third and fourth generation. The term visit makes more sense in light of this new study, which shows that generational curses can, indeed, be scientifically traced back from one generation to another.
Pioneering studies in epigenetics reveals that our life experiences and choices do change us, including our brains, down to the DNA level. And these changes can be passed on to our children and further down the hereditary line. Epigenetics gives insight to how our diets, work environment, even one-off traumatic events can change the genetic legacy we pass on to our children and grandchildren. And I guess I would add that it can, like they said earlier, it could keep going down the line. And that's where you could see it happening with entire tribes and nations and races of people. Yeah. So go ahead and read this paragraph here.
Sure. Epigenetics is information that sits above the genome, which controls the programming of DNA, instructing different cells how to express themselves. In an interview from the Conquer series, a new men's DVD-based teaching series, neuropsychologist Dr. J. Montgomery explains, sensations we put into the brain will use the DNA to change how the cell responds, and those genes are turned off or on based on what that response is. While the DNA doesn't change, the expression does. What's fascinating about this new study is that it reveals that our DNA is not immutable, which was the former notion, but that environment markedly affects our gene expressions and the ways we function and behave.
Okay, so I'm going to skip down on this to inherited information. Epigenetics reveals not epigenetics reveals that not only do we pass along the DNA sequence to our children, but we also pass along the epigenetic instructions to them. In other words, information can be inherited and transmitted through generations. In an experiment on transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, researchers at Emory University trained mice to fear a fruity odor by pairing it with a mild electric shock to the foot. 10 days later, the mice were allowed to mate. Incredibly, their pups feared the odor even without having encountered the smell before. But even more fascinating is that the offspring of those pups, the grandchildren, were born with the same specific memory. We see the mice study applied to humans. One example were the attacks on September 11th. So it talks about how the people who were directly exposed to that attack, these pregnant women, had these women developed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and their children reacted with high levels of fear and stress around loud noises, unfamiliar people, and new foods. So a lot of people say, oh, well, that's just animals. But I mean, this right here is a Christian publication, a very serious Christian publication, I might add. And they're admitting that the same type of genetic factors that you do see in animals are prevalent in people as well. So this is such an interesting article because it basically proves what we've been saying all along, that the tendencies, the fears, and you could even say the likes and dislikes, what you're excited about, those are going to be passed down genetically, in our DNA even. So it's such a fascinating topic. I don't want to sit and read this whole article. I don't know if you think the sins of the father paragraph should be read, but it's just a very I think it's very proving of our point and what we're trying to say here, that races are different and that genetics matter. And when you pass down all these tendencies, whether good or bad or neutral, these are going to affect what type of person you are and how compatible you are going to be with someone you're going to marry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're all informed by the actions of our forefathers. That's. I think if there's one thing that's pretty consistent in Scripture, it's that not just your parents, not just your grandparents, but on back through the covenants, it matters who your parents were. Some were faithful, some were not. Some were, even faithful to specific oaths, and those were honored, and those showed numerous results. Again, some good, some bad, and yeah, so lineage matters. I mean, that's it's how the Gospels are opened up. We start first and foremost with who, from whom did Christ descend. These things do matter.
There's a saying that I've heard a few times, that you are your ancestors. Is that true?
I certainly think so. I think strongly so.
Yeah, and science is proving it out pretty much. I mean, the Bible is always confirmed by true science. We see that in a lot of different areas, and these Christian alienists are definitely on the anti-science side when it comes to this topic. Do you want to read that first paragraph under the sins of the father?
It's cathartic when you can literally put the concept of generational curses under the microscope. Suddenly, your habits and experiences have far greater social implications because you no longer live life just for yourself, but for your descendants too. As Jennings points out, the choices we make, the foods that we eat, the things that we watch, can affect how the DNA is expressed. When we have kids, we pass on the sequence to them, So if we become addicted to stuff, we can pass along to our children gene instructions that make them more vulnerable to addictions. So take pornography addiction, for instance. Since it's the fastest growing epidemic in today's church, according to a recent study, 68% of Christian men are addicted to porn. Most likely, they are unaware of the hereditary ramifications of viewing porn. It doesn't happen generally with one exposure to pornography. It's the repetitive, volitional exposure to pornography that will cause this type of gene expression change to happen, explains Jennings.
So gene expressions are changing based on habits of the fathers. So this is exactly what the scripture means, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children. So sorry to those who think that when you're born, you're just a blank slate, and that if you somehow adopt a child from another country and you raise them in a good home, that means they're going to turn out exactly like your children. They won't, because they have in their DNA things that are different. So I think this is just very very fascinating of a topic. I would love to study it more. I am fascinated with brain science in general, but I love that this is being discovered, and you have to wonder is the church going to see that it's inconsistent when it comes to the topic of tribes and race?
Well, of course, I think we both know that they must eventually see it. I mean, like you said, they're talking about blank slateism, this, tabula rasa idea. But I mean, if we hold to the idea of original sin, that our first parents who fell, and that sin is now passed on to us, and it is forever changed our souls in a very real way. If we're going to hold to this basic doctrine of the faith, how can we pretend that each child is born without the stains of his father's sins on him?
Absolutely, and that's a perfect way to end that. And it's getting dark here.
I noticed, yeah.
Yeah, so it's I guess we're not in God's time zone, right? It's still there's still an hour behind us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us again. You are always a blessing, and we'll talk again next time on another topic. Have a blessed evening, and we'll talk to you again next time.
They just don't understand the meaning of it all. They've been lied to for so long by the God